kids trying to sleep. It was one party, all right? We were done by midnight.
You're exaggerating.
Midnight?
My windows were shaking.
I've got recordings. It's ridiculous.
You need to calm
Don't tell me to
down.
calm.
October 15th, 2023, Chicago, Illinois. Margaret Coleman opened her front door expecting a delivery. Instead, she found Rebecca Hartwell holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of smile that promised trouble. "You need to drop the Patterson case," Rebecca said, stepping uninvited onto Maggie's porch. "My husband's campaign can't afford your theatrics." Maggie had prosecuted enough entitled defendants to recognize the type. Blonde bob, designer handbag, the assumption that money bought compliance. But what Rebecca didn't know was that 28 years ago, Maggie had helped destroy an innocent man's life to protect Rebecca's son. What happened in the next 10 minutes would shatter both women's carefully constructed worlds. Rebecca thought she was intimidating a lawyer. Maggie realized she was facing the mother of the boy whose crime had haunted her for 3 decades. The confrontation that started with arrogance would end with a revelation that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maggie's fingers tightened on the door handle, her prosecutor's instincts cataloging every detail. Rebecca Hartwell stood too close, invading personal space with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. The manila envelope trembled slightly in her manicured grip, nervous energy disguised as authority. "Mrs. Hartwell," Maggie said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her chest. "I think you have me confused with someone who takes orders." Rebecca's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Margaret Coleman, former federal prosecutor, current bleeding heart. You think representing some thug who claims police brutality makes you a hero?" The October wind whipped through the brownstones lining Ashland Avenue, carrying the scent of burning leaves and something else. Something that felt like the past clawing its way back to the surface. Maggie had chosen this neighborhood deliberately 28 years ago, a form of penance that her colleagues called noble and she knew was cowardice. "Devin Patterson isn't a thug," Maggie replied, stepping back to create distance. "He's a 17-year-old honor student who was beaten unconscious by 3 officers for walking while black." Rebecca's eyes flashed. He was resisting arrest. The body cam footage shows him running because he was scared, which became a crime apparently. Maggie started to close the door. "This conversation is over. 28 years ago, you knew how to pick the right side." The words hit like a physical blow. Maggie's hand froze on the door, her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. There was no way Rebecca could know about Marcus Williams. The files were sealed, the case buried beneath decades of legal precedent and bureaucratic amnesia. "Excuse me?" Rebecca's smile widened, predatory now. "The Williams case, 1995. You were so eager to make your mark as a young prosecutor, so determined to put away the dangerous black teenager who murdered my—" "Stop." Maggie's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare." But Rebecca stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "My son Tommy was only 19, a good boy who made one terrible mistake. You helped make sure Marcus Williams paid for it instead." The manila envelope slipped from Rebecca's fingers, spilling photographs across the porch. Crime scene photos, court documents, and there, staring up from the weathered concrete, Marcus Williams' booking photo, 17 years old, eyes wide with terror and confusion that Maggie had convinced herself was guilt. "You kept copies." It wasn't a question. Maggie knelt slowly, gathering the scattered papers with trembling hands. Her neighbors would be home from church soon. Mrs. Patterson next door always walked her dog at 3 o'clock. The last thing she needed was questions about why crime scene photos were decorating her front steps like some macabre welcome mat. "Insurance," Rebecca said, crouching beside her. "Tommy's been clean for 15 years. Married, 2 kids, running for city council on his father's platform of law and order." She laughed, the sound hollow. "Ironic, isn't it?" Maggie's fingers found a police report she'd read 1,000 times, memorized in her guilt-ridden insomnia. Marcus served 26 years before DNA evidence cleared him. 26 years stolen because I was too ambitious to see the truth. Because you did your job. Because I buried evidence that would have exonerated him. The admission hung between them like a loaded gun. The witness who recanted. The timeline that didn't match. The blood evidence that was inconclusive, but I presented as definitive. Rebecca stood slowly, brushing dust from her wool coat. And now Marcus Williams is free. Released last Tuesday to be precise, staying at a halfway house 6 blocks from here. The blood drained from Maggie's face. 6 blocks. In her neighborhood. The neighborhood she'd chosen because it was where Marcus had lived before she destroyed his life. He doesn't know, Rebecca continued, that you live here. Yet. But he's asking questions about the case, hiring lawyers, demanding investigations into prosecutorial misconduct. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Drop the Patterson case. Stop playing savior. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Marcus Williams learns exactly who is responsible for putting him away. And I don't think 28 years in prison has made him particularly forgiving. Maggie clutched the photos to her chest, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. The ambitious young prosecutor who had cut corners, the guilty lawyer who had spent decades trying to atone, the woman who had thought she could outrun her past by helping others. Get off my property, she whispered. Rebecca smiled, straightening her purse strap. You have 48 hours. Drop Patterson, or I destroy you both. As Rebecca's heels clicked down the porch steps, Maggie remained kneeling among the scattered remnants of Marcus Williams' stolen life, finally understanding that some sins don't stay buried. They just wait for the perfect moment to rise from the grave and demand payment. The photographs felt like burning coal against Maggie's chest as she watched Rebecca Hartwell disappear around the corner, her silhouette swallowed by the lengthening October shadows. The street returned to its Sunday afternoon stillness, the kind of deceptive peace that had drawn Maggie to this neighborhood 28 years ago when she'd foolishly believed geography could absolve guilt. Her knees protested as she rose from the concrete, the scattered case files clutched against her wool sweater. 60 felt ancient in moments like this, when the past refused to stay buried, and her body reminded her that she was no longer the sharp-edged prosecutor who had once commanded federal courtrooms with surgical precision. That woman had died the day Marcus Williams' conviction was overturned, leaving behind only this hollow shell who played at redemption in Cook County's family courts. The brownstone's front door closed behind her, with a soft click that echoed through the narrow hallway like a gunshot. Maggie leaned against the carved oak, letting the familiar sense of lemon oil and old books wash over her, sense that usually brought comfort but now felt like a mockery. How many times had she walked through this door believing she'd found sanctuary? How many nights had she sat in her study, reviewing case files for pro bono clients, convincing herself that each small victory somehow balanced the scales? Grandma Maggie? The voice drifted down from the second floor, young and bright and completely unaware that the world had just tilted off its axis. Sophia, 12 years old, all gangly limbs and fierce intelligence, spending Sunday afternoon doing homework at the kitchen table where Maggie had left her 2 hours ago. The light of Maggie's life, the daughter she'd never had, inherited when her son David was deployed overseas and his ex-wife decided motherhood was incompatible with her new lifestyle. Just a minute, sweetheart, Maggie called, her voice steady despite the earthquake rattling her chest. She pressed her back against the door, listening for the sound of small feet on hardwood, the rustle of textbooks, the blessed normalcy of a child's world untouched by the sins of adults. The photograph seemed to burn through her sweater as she climbed the stairs, Marcus Williams' 17-year-old face haunting her peripheral vision. He'd been Sophia's age when they arrested him, an honor student like Devin Patterson, like so many of the kids Maggie now fought to protect. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. Every case she won was a small atonement for the one she'd destroyed. Sophia sat cross-legged on her bed, chemistry textbooks spread across her comforter, dark curls escaping from a messy bun. She looked up with David's warm brown eyes, and Maggie felt her heart clench with protective fury. This child, brilliant, innocent, trusting, was everything worth protecting in the world. And Rebecca Hartwell had just threatened to destroy it all. How was church? Sophia asked, not looking up from her periodic table. Did Mrs. Henderson try to set you up with another widower? Maggie managed a laugh, settling on the edge of the bed. Actually, she was remarkably well behaved today. The lie came easily, a small kindness in a world that had just become infinitely more complicated. How's the homework coming? Brutal. I don't understand why we need to memorize all these elements. When am I ever going to need to know the atomic weight of tungsten? Sophia flopped backward dramatically, her textbook sliding to the floor with a thud. Trust me, Maggie said, tucking a escaped curl behind Sophia's ear. Knowledge is never wasted. Sometimes it's the only weapon you have when the world tries to knock you down. The words carried more weight than intended, and Sophia's expression sharpened with the intuition of a child who'd learned to read adults too well. Are you okay? You look weird. Maggie forced her prosecutor's mask into place, the same calm facade that had served her through decades of high-to-stakes trials. Just tired. It's been a long week. Another lie, but necessary. Sophia had already lost too much stability in her young life. She didn't need to know that her guardian was a disgraced prosecutor living on borrowed time, or that a man with every reason to hate them was 6 blocks away, probably planning his next move. "Want to help me with dinner?" Maggie asked, desperate to return to the illusion of normalcy. "I was thinking about making that pasta you like, the one with the fancy mushrooms Dad hates." Sophia grinned, sitting up with renewed energy. "That's the one." As they headed downstairs together, Sophia chattering about school and friends and the delicious mundane concerns of childhood, Maggie felt the weight of Rebecca's ultimatum pressing against her chest like a physical force. 48 hours to abandon Devin Patterson, to let another young black man face the system alone. 48 hours to choose between her conscience and her family. The kitchen windows faced west, filling the room with golden afternoon light that painted everything in deceptively warm hues. Maggie watched Sophia dig through the refrigerator, her young face animated with the simple pleasure of planning a meal, and felt her heart break a little more. Some choices, she realized, weren't really choices at all. The pasta water was just reaching a rolling boil when the phone rang. Maggie's hands stilled on the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir mushrooms in olive oil, the sizzling suddenly too loud in the golden kitchen. Sophia looked up from where she was grating Parmesan, dark eyebrows raised in question. "I'll get it," Maggie said, wiping her hands on a dish towel with deliberate calm. The landline sat on the counter near the window, its black plastic surface reflecting the late afternoon sun like a warning. She lifted the receiver on the 4th ring. Coleman residence. Silence stretched across the line, punctuated only by the distant sound of traffic and what might have been breathing. Maggie's prosecutor instincts flared to life, cataloging the ambient noise, the quality of the connection, the weight of the pause that felt intentional rather than accidental. "Ms. Coleman?" The voice was male, careful, with the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years breathing recycled prison air. "Margaret Coleman?" The wooden spoon slipped from her other hand, clattering against the stove. Sophia glanced over with mild concern, but Maggie turned toward the window, pressing the phone closer to her ear as if proximity could change what she was hearing. "Who is this?" Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, there was something almost gentle in his voice, the careful politeness of a man who'd learned that any display of anger could be used against him. "My name is Marcus Williams. I think we need to talk." The kitchen tilted around her. 28 years collapsed into nothing. The weight of sleepless nights, the endless pro bono cases, the desperate attempts at atonement all evaporating like steam from the pasta pot. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Patterson walking her ancient beagle down the sidewalk, the same routine she'd followed for decades. Normal life continuing while Maggie's world cracked apart. "How did you get this number?" Phone book. A hint of something that might have been humor. Amazing what you can find in there. "Margaret Coleman, defense attorney. Same street where I used to live before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Maggie gripped the receiver harder, her knuckles white against the black plastic. Behind her, she could hear Sophia humming under her breath, the domestic sound of cheese being grated, the bubble of water that needed attention. Life demanding to continue, even as the past rose up to devour it. "Mr. Williams, 6 blocks, he said quietly. "You live 6 blocks from where they arrested me, where they put me in handcuffs in front of my baby sister and told her that her brother was a killer." His voice remained steady, controlled, but there was steel underneath now. Funny coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence. The admission escaped before she could stop it, raw and honest in a way that terrified her. "I moved here because I needed to remember." "Remember what?" "What I did to you." The silence that followed stretched so long she wondered if he'd hung up. In the background, she could hear the faint sound of voices, institutional echoes that spoke of group homes and halfway houses, and the careful supervision of men society still didn't trust despite their innocence. 26 years, he said finally. 26 years wondering if anyone involved in my case ever thought about whether they got it right. Whether anyone lost sleep over a 17-year-old kid who kept saying he was innocent even when his own lawyer told him to shut up and take the plea. Maggie closed her eyes, seeing again that terrified boy in the oversized orange jumpsuit, his mother crying in the gallery while she painted him as a monster with surgical precision. "I lost sleep," she whispered, "every night for 28 years. Good. The word carried no malice, just a quiet satisfaction that justice, however incomplete, had found some expression. Because now I'm out, and I'm asking questions about evidence that went missing, about witnesses who changed their stories, about a prosecutor who was so eager to make her mark that she didn't care who got buried in the process. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the golden light harsh rather than warm. Sophia had moved to the stove, taking over the mushrooms without being asked, her movements efficient and careful, too careful for a 12-year-old, the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned that adults couldn't always be counted on to keep things together. "What do you want?" Maggie asked. "The truth." Marcus's voice hardened, years of institutional authority seeping through his careful control, all of it. The real evidence, the deals that were made, the people who knew Tommy Hartwell was guilty and let me take the fall anyway. Rebecca's face flashed through Maggie's memory, that predatory smile as she'd scattered the photographs across the porch, the threat delivered with surgical precision, designed to force exactly this moment. Marcus calling, the past returning, the careful balance of Maggie's constructed life crumbling into chaos. "Mr. Williams, I'll be in touch, Ms. Coleman, soon." The line went dead. Maggie stared at the dead receiver for a long moment, before setting it back in its cradle with trembling fingers. The kitchen hummed with domestic normalcy, the bubbling pasta water, the gentle sizzle of mushrooms, Sophia's soft humming as she moved between counter and stove with the unconscious grace of a child playing house. "Wrong number?" Sophia asked without looking up, her voice carrying that careful casualness kids mastered when adults were acting strange. "Something like that." Maggie's prosecutor training kicked in, smoothing her expression into neutral competence. But her hands betrayed her, shaking as she reached for the wooden spoon Sophia had rescued from the burner. The mushrooms had gone from golden to dark brown, their edges crispy with neglect. Salvageable, but not the perfection she'd planned. Like everything else in her carefully constructed life, apparently. "Grandma Maggie." Sophia's voice held a note of concern now. "You're stirring empty air." Maggie looked down to find the spoon moving in useless circles above the pan. She set it aside, pressing her palms against the cool granite countertop. Think, process, compartmentalize. The skills that had once made her legendary in federal court felt rusty now, insufficient against the weight of Marcus Williams' careful politeness and the promise lurking beneath it. "I'll be in touch. Soon." "Maybe we should order pizza instead," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Sophia's eyebrows rose. "You hate pizza on Sundays. You said it was—" "I know what I said." The sharpness in her tone made Sophia flinch, and Maggie immediately softened. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Let me think for a minute." But thinking was dangerous territory now. Thinking led to the manila envelope hidden in her bedroom closet, its contents seared into her memory like brands. Crime scene photos, witness statements, the careful architecture of a case built on prosecutorial ambition and willful blindness. The landline rang again. This time, Sophia reached for it first, her young reflexes quicker than Maggie's fear-stiffened muscles. "Coleman residence? This is—" "Don't." Maggie snatched the phone away, her sudden movement sending the cheese grater clattering to the floor. "Don't answer that." The ringing continued, sharp and insistent in the golden kitchen. 4 rings, 5. The answering machine should pick up, but Maggie had disconnected it months ago after too many robocalls interrupted Sunday dinners. Now she stood frozen, watching the phone ring like an accusation. On the 7th ring, silence returned. "Okay," Sophia said slowly, "what's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing because you just karate chopped a phone out of my hand." Maggie knelt to retrieve the grater, buying time she didn't have to find words that wouldn't shatter a 12-year-old's world. How do you explain that the past doesn't stay buried? That the woman who taught Sunday school and made careful pasta dinners was once ambitious enough to destroy an innocent boy's life? That everything safe about their small domestic world was built on foundations of sand and guilt? "There's someone from my old job," she said finally. Someone I hurt. A long time ago, before I became a defense attorney. Hurt how? The question hung between them, innocent and impossible to answer. Sophia had inherited her father's fierce sense of justice, his inability to accept that good people sometimes did terrible things for complicated reasons. How do you tell a child that her grandmother was once the monster in someone else's story? I made a mistake, a big one. And now I have to figure out how to make it right. Sophia studied her with eyes too old for her face, the weight of grown-up secrets settling between them like dust. Is that why you only take cases for kids like Devin Patterson? Because you're trying to fix something you broke? The insight was too sharp, too accurate. Maggie felt exposed under her granddaughter's gaze, all her careful reconstructions of motive and meaning crumbling under a child's clearer vision. Yes, she whispered. The phone rang again. This time Maggie let it, counting the rings like a countdown to some inevitable explosion. 7 rings. Silence. Then, almost immediately, it started again. Someone was being very persistent. Should we call Dad? Sophia asked, her voice smaller now. No. The answer came too quickly, too sharp. David was 3,000 miles away, deployed somewhere she couldn't even name, trying to keep other people's children, safe in a world that seemed determined to destroy innocence. He didn't need to know that his own child might be in danger because of choices his mother made before he was born. The ringing stopped mid-note, as if the caller had simply given up. Maggie moved to the window, pulling the lace curtain aside to study the street below. The same tree-lined avenue she'd walked for decades. The same brownstones with their carved stonework and careful gardens. Mrs. Patterson was heading home with her beagle, moving slowly in the gathering dusk. Everything looked normal. Everything looked safe. But Marcus Williams was 6 blocks away, asking questions that could destroy them all. The house felt different after dark. Maggie sat in her study, the same room where she'd spent countless nights preparing cases for clients who reminded her of Marcus Williams, young, black, failed by a system designed to grind them down. The irony tasted bitter now, each pro bono victory revealed as hollow penance for a sin that couldn't be undone. The manila envelope lay open on her mahogany desk, its contents spread like evidence at a crime scene. 28 years hadn't faded the photographs. Tommy Hartwell's body in the alley, the knife beside him, the blood that had seemed so damning when they pinned it on Marcus. But there were other photos too, ones that had never made it to trial. Tommy with needle tracks on his arms, Tommy arguing with the dealer outside the school. Tommy, Rebecca Hartwell's golden boy, revealed as something far darker. Maggie's fingers traced a police report she'd buried in legal motions, a witness statement from Maria Santos, the cleaning lady who'd seen a white teenager running from the alley at the time of the murder. Maria, who'd been deported 2 weeks before the trial, her testimony conveniently unavailable when Marcus needed it most. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the truth they'd known, all of them. The lead detective who'd lost key evidence, the medical examiner who'd rushed the autopsy, and Margaret Coleman, ambitious young prosecutor, who'd looked the other way because a conviction would make her career. Upstairs, Sophia's bedtime routine echoed through the old house, running water, the creak of floorboards, the soft thud of textbooks being stacked for tomorrow. Normal sounds that felt like borrowed time now. The doorbell rang at 9:47 p.m. Maggie froze, her hand halfway to another photograph. No one visited this late unless something was catastrophically wrong. Through the sheer curtains of her study, she could see a figure on the porch, tall, patient, hands visible at his sides, in the careful posture of someone who'd learned that any sudden movement could be fatal. Marcus Williams. She thought about pretending not to be home, but the lights were on, her car in the driveway, the evidence of occupancy impossible to hide, and somewhere in her prosecutor's heart, beneath layers of guilt and fear, lived the recognition that this moment had always been inevitable. The bell rang again, shorter this time, more insistent. "Grandma Maggie?" Sophia's voice drifted down the stairs. "Someone's at the door." "I know, sweetheart. Stay upstairs." Maggie closed the envelope with shaking hands, sliding it into the desk drawer as if hiding evidence could change what was coming. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, each step echoing with the weight of 28 years of careful avoidance. She opened the door. Marcus Williams looked older than his 45 years, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of men who'd survived decades of institutional control. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, but his eyes held the same intelligence that had made him such an inconvenient defendant. Too smart, too articulate, too obviously innocent for anyone's comfort. Ms. Coleman. He stood perfectly still on her porch, hands loose at his sides, voice carefully neutral. Thank you for not pretending to be asleep. Mr. Williams. She kept the door partially closed, her body blocking the entrance. It's late. Yes. His gaze moved past her to the warm lights spilling from the hallway, the evidence of a life lived in comfort while his had been stolen. But 26 years was later. The words hit like physical blows. Behind her, she could hear Sophia moving around upstairs, probably trying to eavesdrop with 12-year-old determination. The thought of her granddaughter witnessing this conversation made Maggie's chest tighten with protective panic. You said you wanted the truth, she said quietly. But what you really want is revenge. Marcus shook his head slowly. Revenge would be easy, Ms. Coleman. Revenge would be going to the Tribune with what I know about the evidence you buried, about the witnesses you silenced, about how a prosecutor's office covered up a white boy's crimes to keep their conviction rate intact. Each accusation landed with surgical precision, designed to cut through her defenses without causing unnecessary damage to the innocent bystanders upstairs. He'd learned strategy in prison, she realized. Patience. The careful deployment of information as leverage rather than weapon. But, he continued, I don't want revenge. I want my life back. I want the record cleared. I want every prosecutor's office in this city to know what happens when they railroad innocent people for political convenience. And if I refuse to help you? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, the careful calculation of a man who'd survived 2.5 decades in a system designed to break him. Then I'll get the truth without you, Miss Coleman, but it won't be as clean, and it won't be as private. Through the glass panels beside her door, Maggie could see her neighbor's house, lights still burning in windows where other families lived normal lives, untouched by the sins of ambitious prosecutors. The truth was coming whether she helped or not. The only question was whether she'd have any control over the devastation. Maggie gripped the doorframe tighter, her knuckles white against the painted wood. The September night air carried the smell of dying leaves and something else, the metallic scent of rain coming, or perhaps just the taste of her own fear. There's something else, she said, the words scraping against her throat like broken glass. Something you don't know. Marcus's carefully controlled expression flickered. I know enough. No. She shook her head, 28 years of buried truth clawing its way up from the depths where she'd tried to drown it. You know what they wanted you to know, what I let them make you believe. But the real reason you went to prison, the real reason they needed you to take the fall. She stopped, looking up at the windows above where Sophia might be listening, then stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind her. The October air bit through her cardigan, but the cold felt appropriate somehow, a small punishment for what she was about to confess. Tommy Hartwell wasn't just some drug dealer who got himself killed, she whispered. He was Rebecca Hartwell's son, and Rebecca Hartwell was sleeping with the district attorney. The words hung between them like poison in the air. Marcus went very still, that prison-learned stillness that preceded either violence or devastating clarity. Jim Morrison? His voice was barely audible. The DA was having an affair, yes. For 2 years. Tommy found out, started blackmailing his mother, threatening to expose everything unless she gave him money for drugs. When that wasn't enough, he started selling information. Case details, evidence, anything Morrison discussed at home. Maggie's breath came in short puffs, visible in the cooling air. The murder wasn't random, Marcus. Tommy was killed because he was going to sell Morrison's corruption to the Tribune. Marcus stepped backward as if she'd struck him, his careful composure finally cracking. You're telling me, you're saying I spent 26 years in prison because some white boy was blackmailing his mother's boyfriend? It gets worse. The admission tasted like ash. Morrison knew Tommy was dealing at the school, knew he was violent, unstable, but he couldn't touch him without exposing the affair. When Tommy turned up dead, Morrison saw an opportunity, clean up his mess and advance his career in one stroke. By framing me, by making sure the investigation pointed away from anyone who might expose the affair. Maria Santos, the witness who saw a white teenager running from the alley. Morrison had ICE pick her up on a trumped-up violation. The medical examiner who wanted to run more tests on the timeline, suddenly his budget got cut. The detective who thought the evidence didn't add up? Maggie's voice broke. Car accident. Very convenient. Marcus was staring at her now with an expression she couldn't read, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name. When he spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous quiet. "And you? What was your excuse?" This was the moment she'd rehearsed in her mind for 3 decades. The confession that would either damn or absolve her. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Morrison told me you had priors, that you were dangerous, that putting you away would save other kids from getting hurt. He showed me a file, fake, I know now, that made you look like a career criminal just waiting to graduate to murder." Bullshit. The word cut through her explanation like a blade. "You knew. Maybe not all of it, but you knew something was wrong. You're too smart, too good a prosecutor to miss that many red flags." He was right, and the truth of it felt like drowning. I was 26 years old, and he was offering me chief of the Violent Crimes Division if I got the conviction. I told myself the evidence was solid enough. That reasonable doubt was just doubt. Jesus Christ. Marcus ran a hand over his face, the gesture suddenly, devastatingly human. 26 years of my life because you wanted a promotion. I know how it sounds. You don't know anything. His voice rose slightly, then dropped back to that careful prison whisper as he remembered where they were. You don't know what it's like to be 17 and watch your mother cry herself to sleep every night because everyone thinks her son is a monster. You don't know what it's like to wake up in a cell for 9,000 mornings knowing you're innocent and having nobody believe you. Maggie felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't have the right to cry. Not now. Morrison's dead. Killed himself 5 years ago when the corruption finally caught up with him. Rebecca remarried, moved to California. The truth died with them. Except for you. Except for me. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something terrible in his eyes. Not hatred, which would have been easier to bear, but a kind of profound disappointment that cut deeper than rage. "All these years," he said softly, "I thought the system failed me. Turns out the system worked exactly like it was supposed to. It just wasn't designed for people like me." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of wind through the oak trees lining Maggie's street. Marcus stood motionless on her porch, his breathing visible in the cooling air, and she could see him processing the full weight of what she'd revealed, not just the corruption, but the casual cruelty of it, the way his life had been bartered away like currency in someone else's transaction. "There's more," Maggie said, the words barely audible. She was past the point of partial truths now, standing at the edge of a precipice she'd avoided for 3 decades. "The knife they found beside Tommy's body. The one with your fingerprints." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "What about it?" "It came from the kitchen at Lincoln High. From the cafeteria where you worked after school to help pay for your mother's medications." The admission felt like swallowing glass. Morrison had someone take it weeks before the murder. Your prints were already on it because you'd used it cutting vegetables for lunch prep. She watched understanding dawn across his features, followed by something that looked like physical illness. Marcus gripped the porch railing, his knuckles going white against the painted wood. "They planned it," he said, his voice hollow. "Before Tommy was even dead, they were planning to frame me." Morrison knew Tommy was unstable, knew he was escalating. He needed insurance, someone to blame when his little blackmailer inevitably became too dangerous to ignore. Maggie's throat felt raw, scraped clean by truths she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. "You were convenient, Marcus. Young, black, working class, the perfect patsy for a prosecutor's office that needed a quick conviction to distract from their own rot." Marcus turned away from her, staring out at the quiet street where normal families lived normal lives behind lit windows. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man reconciling himself to the true scope of his stolen years. "My mother died believing I was guilty," he said. "Lung cancer, 2003. I was still fighting the appeals, still insisting I was innocent. She visited me every month for 8 years, right up until the chemo made her too weak to travel. And every single visit I could see it in her eyes, the doubt, the wondering if maybe, just maybe, her son really was capable of murder." Maggie felt something breaking inside her chest, some carefully maintained wall between action and consequence. "Marcus, She died thinking she'd failed me, that somehow she hadn't loved me enough, hadn't been strong enough to keep me from becoming a killer." His words came faster now, 26 years of suppressed grief, and rage finally finding voice. The last thing she said to me was, "I'm sorry." Not "I love you" or "be strong," just "I'm sorry," like my imaginary crimes were somehow her fault. The weight of it hit Maggie like a physical blow. She'd known about the conviction, about the years stolen, about the career destroyed, but she'd never let herself think about the collateral damage, the families destroyed, the relationships poisoned, the generations of trauma radiating outward from her choices like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Behind her, she heard the soft creak of floorboards. Sophia, probably trying to listen from the top of the stairs. The sound reminded her of everything she stood to lose, everything that could still be destroyed if this conversation went wrong. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Marcus turned back to face her, and in the dim porch light she could see tears tracking down his cheeks, the first emotion he'd allowed himself to show since arriving at her door. "I want my name cleared, officially. I want the conviction overturned, the records expunged, and a public acknowledgement of what was done to me." His voice steadied as he spoke, each word precise and measured. "I want every prosecutor's office in this state to know that there are consequences for railroading innocent people, that someone is watching, that someone remembers. And if I help you get that, then maybe we can both live with what we've done." Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, the gesture somehow dignified despite the tears. "But understand something, Miss Coleman. This isn't forgiveness. This isn't redemption. This is just two people trying to find a way forward that doesn't destroy everything in its path." Maggie nodded, understanding the terms he was offering. Not absolution, but perhaps something more valuable, the chance to finally stop running from the truth. "Rebecca Hartwell," she said. "She knows you're out. She's been calling me, panicking. If we move forward with this, she'll fight back. She has resources, connections, a new family to protect." Marcus's expression hardened. "Let her fight. I've got nothing left to lose." But looking at the warm light spilling from her hallway, thinking of Sophia upstairs, Maggie knew that wasn't true. They both had everything left to lose. The real question was whether the truth was worth the price they'd all have to pay for it. The moment stretched between them like a held breath, heavy with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Maggie looked at Marcus, this man whose life she'd helped destroy, who now stood on her porch offering something that might have been mercy, and felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble. "I'll help you," she said, the words falling into the night air like stones into deep water. "Not because I deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve justice." Finally, Marcus studied her face in the dim porch light, searching for deception or self-serving motivation. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "There's something else you need to know," he said. "Rebecca didn't just call you. She came to see me yesterday." Maggie felt ice form in her stomach. "What?" "Showed up at my apartment with an envelope full of cash and a plane ticket to Seattle. Said she had family there who could help me start over, find work. All I had to do was sign a paper saying I wouldn't pursue any legal action related to my conviction." His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. 26 years too late, but apparently my silence still has a price. The calculation was so coldly pragmatic, so perfectly Rebecca, that Maggie felt a surge of the old prosecutorial rage she hadn't experienced in years. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that if she ever came near me again, I'd make sure her new husband learned some interesting facts about her first son's death." Marcus's voice carried the quiet steel of a man who'd learned to weaponize patience. "She left the cash on my table like some kind of guilt offering. I donated it to the Innocence Project this morning." From inside the house came the soft sound of Sophia's bedroom door closing. Trying to listen, then retreating when she realized the conversation had moved beyond her ability to safely eavesdrop. The normalcy of the sound felt surreal against the backdrop of conspiracy and decades-old corruption being unraveled on her front porch. "She'll escalate," Maggie said. "Rebecca spent 30 years building a life based on the lie that her son was the victim instead of the perpetrator. She won't give that up easily. I'm counting on it." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small digital recorder, the red light blinking steadily. "This conversation we just had, it's all documented. Every detail about Morrison, about the planted evidence, about the witness tampering. If something happens to me, an accident, a convenient overdose, whatever Rebecca and her resources might arrange, My lawyer has instructions to release everything to the media. Maggie stared at the device, understanding blooming like a cold flower in her chest. You didn't come here for my help. You came here for my confession. I came here for both. His expression softened slightly, showing glimpses of the 17-year-old boy who'd once believed the system would protect him. I could have exposed all of this without you, Maggie. Could have let you burn along, with Morrison's legacy and Rebecca's new life. But that wouldn't have brought my mother back. Wouldn't have given me those 26 years. He paused, looking past her into the warm light of her hallway where family photos lined the walls, evidence of a life lived in freedom while his had been stolen. What it might do, he continued, is prevent some other kid from going through what I went through, some other mother from dying thinking she raised a monster. The truth of it hit her with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about justice for Marcus Williams. It was about every case that came after, every prosecutor who might be tempted to take shortcuts, every defendant who might find themselves facing a system more interested in convenience than truth. The review board will destroy my reputation, she said, not seeking sympathy, but simply acknowledging the scope of what she was agreeing to. I'll probably be disbarred. Sophia will have to live with knowing her grandmother helped send an innocent man to prison. Yes, Marcus agreed, his honesty brutal and clean. That's exactly what will happen. The question is whether you think the truth is worth more than your comfort. Behind them, the street lay quiet and peaceful, lined with houses where other families slept soundly, untroubled by the weight of old sins coming due. Maggie thought of Sophia upstairs, of the life they'd built together, of all the ways this revelation would shatter the careful stability she'd constructed from the wreckage of her guilt. Then she thought of Marcus's mother, dying with doubt in her heart about the son she'd loved and lost to a system that had never intended to be fair. When do we start? She asked. Marcus turned off the recorder and slipped it back into his pocket. For the first time since he'd appeared on her doorstep, something that might have been relief crossed his features. Tomorrow, he said. I'll call my lawyer in the morning, set up a meeting. We'll do this right, full disclosure, complete documentation, everything above board. He turned to go, then paused at the edge of her porch. Maggie, he said, and his use of her first name felt like a small grace. Thank you. She watched him walk away into the darkness, carrying with him the power to destroy everything she'd built since that terrible choice 30 years ago. But for the first time in decades, the weight on her chest felt lighter. The truth was finally coming home. Maggie remained on her porch long after Marcus disappeared into the darkness, watching the empty street, as if his ghost might materialize again among the shadows cast by streetlights. The October air had turned sharp with the promise of winter, but she felt no urge to go inside, to return to the warmth where difficult conversations waited and harder truths would need to be shared. Behind her, the house settled into its familiar nighttime rhythms. Sophia's footsteps moved softly across the upstairs hallway, probably returning to bed after listening from the top of the stairs, trying to piece together fragments of a story that would soon reshape everything she thought she knew about her grandmother. The sound should have comforted Maggie, but instead it felt like a countdown to an ending she couldn't prevent. 6 months later, she would look back on this moment as the last breath before the avalanche. The disciplinary hearing took place on a gray January morning that matched the fluorescent bleakness of the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission building. Maggie sat at the respondent's table in a navy suit that had once made her feel powerful, now hanging loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds during the months of investigation, depositions, and sleepless nights that followed her confession. Marcus testified first, his voice steady as he recounted 26 years of stolen life with the same methodical precision she remembered from his first trial, except this time he was telling the truth. The commissioners listened, with expressions that cycled between professional neutrality and barely concealed horror, as the full scope of the corruption emerged, the planted evidence, the silenced witnesses, the calculated decision to destroy an innocent teenager's life to protect a prosecutor's career. When it was Maggie's turn, she spoke without notes, without the careful legal language that had armored her through decades of courtroom battles. She told them about the ambition that had made her blind, about the fear that had made her complicit, about 30 years of guilt that had hollowed her out from the inside while Marcus rotted in prison for a crime he didn't commit. I convinced myself I was serving justice, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hearing room. But justice was never the goal. The goal was advancement, recognition, the approval of men who saw conviction rates as more important than truth. I failed Marcus Williams. I failed his mother. I failed every principle I claimed to stand for. The commissioners asked few questions. The evidence was overwhelming, documented now in meticulous detail by Marcus's legal team and the journalists who had picked up the story after his conviction was officially overturned. The Tribune ran it as a three-part series, The Williams Case, How Prosecutorial Ambition Destroyed an Innocent Life. Rebecca Hartwell's name appeared in every installment, along with details of her son's drug dealing and the blackmail scheme that had ultimately gotten him killed. Maggie was disbarred on a Wednesday in February. She cleaned out her office that afternoon, packing 30 years of legal career into boxes that Sophia helped her carry to the car. Her granddaughter had grown quieter in recent months, processing the revelation that her hero grandmother was also capable of profound moral failure, but she'd never withdrawn her love or support. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked, as they loaded the last box into the trunk. Maggie looked up at the building where she'd spent the last decade, defending people the system had failed, trying to balance some cosmic scale that had been weighted against her since 1995. "I don't know," she admitted. "Something useful, I hope." The answer came unexpectedly 3 weeks later, in the form of a phone call from the Cook County Public Defender's Office. They were looking for someone to run their new wrongful conviction review unit, a civilian position that wouldn't require a law license, just experience, judgment, and an understanding of how the system could go wrong. The caller didn't need to say that Marcus Williams had recommended her for the job. They both understood the poetry of it. On a warm day in April, Maggie walked into a cramped office filled with case files and began the work of undoing damage she understood intimately. The irony wasn't lost on her, using the knowledge gained from destroying one life to help rebuild others. It felt like penance, but also like purpose. Marcus came by during her second week, carrying coffee and wearing a smile that had taken months to return to his face. His conviction had been officially expunged, his record cleared, his name restored. The settlement from the state would never compensate for what had been taken, but it provided security and acknowledgement of the wrong done to him. "How does it feel?" he asked, gesturing at the stacks of case files covering her desk. Maggie considered the question, thinking of the 17-year-old in the top file who'd been convicted on testimony from a witness who later recanted, thinking of Marcus's mother dying with doubt in her heart, thinking of all the second chances that came too late. "Heavy," she said finally, "but honest." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of truth in ways most people never would. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had learned that redemption wasn't about forgiveness or absolution, but about choosing to carry the consequences of their choices in service of something larger than themselves. Outside, Chicago hummed with its endless rhythms of hope and disappointment, justice and failure, second chances and final endings. And in a small office filled with other people's broken stories, Maggie Coleman began the long work of learning to live with her own.